Welcome to this meeting of the Board of Education. This special meeting, is being televised live on AACPS TV and streamed on AACPS's YouTube channel. General information and protocols for the meeting are posted on the sign by the doorway as you enter the room, so please make sure you read those if you have not already. And now for the invocation. O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies, being ever mindful of your guidance, stir us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding. And now for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now to establish the agenda order. Do I have a motion to?
Motion to adopt the agenda as written.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Do I have consensus to adopt the agenda? Okay, the agenda has been adopted. And now for public comment. As Ms. Schallheim goes back to begin the virtual portion of our public comment, I will remind everyone here that speakers will be allotted 2 minutes each and may not allocate their time to others. Ms. Howell will, or the buzzer will indicate when your time has expired. The board asks that comments remain civil and appropriate for various audiences that may be watching or viewing. Student-specific and personnel matters are confidential and cannot be discussed in this forum. It is not the board's general practice to engage in question and answer session with speakers. For the record, please give your name before speaking. And any handouts should be given to the board assistant.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to read this one more time just in case folks didn't get online in the stream. Speakers will be allotted 2 minutes each. You may not allocate your time to others. Ms. Howell will indicate when your time has expired. The board asks that comments remain civil and appropriate for the various audiences that may be watching or viewing this meeting, and must only address the topic on which they were signed up to speak. Student-specific and personnel matters are confidential and cannot be discussed in this forum. It is not the board's general practice to engage in question and answer session with speakers. For the record, please give your name before speaking. And we're going to kick off virtual testimony tonight with Randall Jubb.
Hi, good evening. My name is Randall Jubb, and I'm the owner of Jubb's Ball Service and Wilson Ball Service. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would like to thank Dr. Alato for this plan and County Executive Pittman for reaching out to contractors and meeting with us on multiple occasions. I know this is an urgent response to an urgent situation, and we are grateful. We do have 3 specific concerns about Dr. Alato's plan. Number 1, with the very same end goal of giving every driver a $5 an hour raise, which we fully support, we ask that it be done through a percentage increase to our driver pay category of our contracts. This is how you structured the 1% increase you gave drivers a few weeks ago, and it was a better way to implement. A flat $5 raise would cost contractors more than that to implement by increasing our workman's comp insurance and federal and Social Security, since they are all based on our payroll. We are by no means seeking to make any more money here. We are just seeking to cover our costs the same as we do currently. Number 2, pay increases will also affect any additional school sponsor activities outside of regular routes, which we must consider since most of them have already been booked and priced for the school year. Number 3, by making this a supplemental budget, what happens when the federal dollars run out? It may be possible that the above concerns are being considered, but it is important for you, the board, and Dr. Alato to include us as contractors in the process of laying out the details of this plan, so the D-type of things and others issues are not overlooked. I would like to thank you for including a retention bonus as well as a signing bonus, which rewards the hardworking drivers we already have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kurt Svensson.
Hello, my name is Kurt Svensson. I live in Arnold, Maryland. Uh, Despite the superintendent's assertions to the contrary, the school bus transportation problem is most definitely the responsibility of the Anne Arundel County Public Schools and a situation of their own making. The school system's own January 8th, 2020 school bus transportation consultant report reveals this fact. Specific quotations pulled from that report are provided in my written testimony, all of which support one of the consultant's many conclusions, which conservatively estimates at least 5% of existing runs could be consolidated, saving $2.5 million annually. At the time of that report, there were 581 contractor buses. Do the math. 5% of 581 is 29 buses. That's half the problem. What's the status of this report's many recommendations? Rather than just throw money at the problem, why not actually use the transportation system that was purchased back in 2015 to design a smaller number of more efficient bus routes that are based on policy guidance and design build criteria such as walking distance to stops? Why is it okay to ask elementary students to walk a mile to their school, but bus students cannot walk a tiny fraction of that distance to their bus stop? Where's the school board policy? Look at bus 312 in my area. It circles around Magathie River Middle to take kids to Belvedere. What if that middle school was the single pickup stop, a hub, if you will, one stop in and out? An 8-stop, 13-minute route would become a 1-stop, 4-minute route. Take a few of those and you've eliminated an entire route. I think we need creative thinking here. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. That concludes the virtual testimony portion of the meeting, and thank you all for joining.
And speakers who are here in person. First, I have Arjan Van Andel. My apologies if I not pronounced that correctly.
Let's see if this works. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Arjan Van Andel, and I am the chair of the Anne Arundel County Transportation Commission. I would like to highlight that a salary increase could lead to increased availability of bus drivers, but that we should not expect the service to resume back to normal directly after this measure. The shortage of drivers is a global challenge, not just for school bus operators. Public transit agencies across the world are dealing with similar issues. This is why I would like to stress the importance of building a resilient network. This can be done in several ways, where I would like to highlight 3 opportunities for the county to evaluate these in the near future. The first one is that the approved Move Anne Arundel plan recommends an emphasis on safe biking and walking for the county in general, as also for school children. It recommends that AACPS create and staff a full-time position for a safe walk-bike to school position to measure and increase the number of safe routes and the number of children walking and biking to school. This is the most effective and least cost way to alleviate the school bus issues, traffic, environmental protection, and most important, student health. Also, the County Office of Transportation has secured a Safe Routes to School grant, and AACPS must assign a point person to work with OOT on this initiative that includes both safe routes and bike safety programs. The second recommendation is to look into the provision of more general public transportation services. Our county spends a factor 4 to 10 less per capita on public transportation than our surrounding counties. This means that there's no or little availability for people with special needs to get to their destination. But on top of that, there is no resilience in the system to provide assistance in case of emergencies like we see today at the Anne Arundel County Public Schools. A budget increase similar to the currently proposed school bus increase would triple the available public transportation services in the county, benefiting not only those in need, but also our school children. That brings me to the last suggestion. Many cities and counties across the nation provide alternative options for middle schoolers and high schoolers to travel to and from school. This can be in the form of bike and pedestrian access, as earlier mentioned, but can also be in the form of general public transportation options, as also previously mentioned. These alternatives will reduce the need for costly transportation services in the future and create more resiliency across the county. It will also stimulate healthier behavior, reduced emissions, and reduced congestion in the county. I recommend to bringing together the resources and team members across the OOT and AACPS. Thank you for this opportunity.
And finally, we have Julia Laws.
Good evening, Dr. Arlotto and members of the board. I'm Julia Laws, parent of an AACPS student. First, I'd like to thank you for your work towards resolving the transportation issues here in Anne Arundel County. Despite our county executive's obnoxious attempts to make this appear as though he is responsible for these negotiations, I know that you started working on this before the Annapolis drivers went on strike and long before Stuart Pittman jumped at the opportunity to take credit. I am excited to see some hopeful solutions. However, with that excitement, I also have some concerns. If we are going to throw close to $10 million at this problem, we should be damn sure that it not only solves it, but that we also don't find ourselves in a similar situation down the road. As I read through the press release, a few things come to mind. Why $5? Where is it going? Can we be sure that this money makes it into the hands of drivers and attendants and not just extra profit for contractors? Will drivers and attendants actually be working a full 8-hour day? Are there any other positions within AACPS that drivers and attendants could be utilized to earn this income? Whether it be within nutritional services, substituting, custodial work, school operation teams, or possibly assisting with the continuity of learning during these excessive quarantines. 3, while signing and retention bonuses sound great to attract more drivers, what about all of the other people who showed up each and every day throughout this pandemic? Those who showed up to feed our children, address ventilation in our buildings, clean between cohorts, and completely reinvent education, can they also expect to receive incentives? 4, my biggest concern is that with rewarding those who decided to capitalize on this shortage, I have 2 issues with this. 1, the drivers that intentionally stranded kids at bus stops did not act within the best interests of AACPS students. That was reckless and endangered many children, including the child who was almost abducted trying to access a city bus for transportation. 2, allowing those drivers to keep their jobs and rewarding them opens too many doors for others to use our kids as pawns for their own personal gain. This may be a quick fix for this one issue, but what happens if next week our nutritional service staff, custodians, TAs, secretaries, operational teams decide to do the same? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our public comment. And so now we are moving on to the main item on the agenda. I'm sorry, I don't have the agenda in front of me, but thank you. It is, I just want to make sure I worded it right. The fiscal year 22 recurring supplemental operating budget request. And before I turn this over to Dr. Arlotto, I would like to welcome and thank our county executive, Stuart Pittman, for attending this evening. And Dr. Arlotto, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, thank you very much. I recommend your approval of the second quarter operating budget supplemental request for fiscal year 2022 to be submitted to the County Council.
Thank you for your recommendation, Dr. Arlotto. We're going to discuss first, I guess. There's no. Okay, and County Executive Pittman, I invite you to join us. I presume you have something you'd like to say, and
I brought our budget officer, Chris Trumbauer. Is it okay if he joins me up here as well?
thank you. Good evening, Mr. Trumbauer. Thanks for coming. So Dr. Arlotto, I mean, you have released this plan. Is there anything you want to explain about it, or would you like me to start with the county executive?
I think you should start with the County Executive. you have a document in front of you showing the unrestricted budget. When it's appropriate, Mr. Shanknovich will come forward and present so you have a better understanding of where those numbers are coming from. And then we're glad to take questions.
Okay, great.
Yes, ma'am.
So County Executive Pittman, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you. You know, you get what you ask for, and we asked for a proposal, we got a proposal, and I was pleased to see it. The county council will have a lot of questions. I know that our budget analysts are eager to look at this and crunch some numbers and figure out you know, how to pay for this, whether it's the right number, whether or not we can or should be using our ARP money for the retention and hiring bonuses. Obviously, when we talk about a large recurring budget item, that's got nothing to do with federal money, and that's on the taxpayers of Anne Arundel County. And to do this requires us to make some tough decisions. So we have a lot of work to do before we prepare our county council for this, assuming that you move forward with it. And I was glad to hear Mr. Jubb, I think his name was, one of the contractors, talking about it. I mean, he raised examples of issues that we all should look at, and I see this as a proposal to work from. But I think it raises the right issues. It talks permanent increases, it talks hiring bonuses, and it talks retention bonuses. We have to decide whether we can do all three and whether those are the right numbers. I do believe, and I've said before, that after talking to the contractors a couple times, some drivers, talking to Dr. Arlotto, talking to the governor, talking to everybody about this, that it is a market issue and that we're losing drivers and we can't afford to continue losing them to higher paid positions. And my assessment was that we needed to do something and do something quickly so that drivers would get a feeling that we will act, that the future will look better, so that we can hang on to the ones we have and get going recruiting. None of us know how quickly these companies can fill their vacant positions, and that's the big question. We don't even know that this is going to work, but everything that we're hearing tells us that it is a market issue, and that's the way employers deal with tight labor markets. Is all over the country people are raising pay, especially for workers at the low end of the wage scale. And these folks are we're told averaging about $25,000 a year, and so they are at the low end of the wage scale. So they're responsible for getting our kids to school and from school. And I think all of us in this room, we're one team. We deal with the same source of money, which is the taxpayers. We get some federal, we get some state, but we basically have to make wise decisions and get our kids to school so that they can learn. So thank you for everything you do, and thank you for this proposal.
And if you don't mind, County Executive, I'll go around as often you members from your team come here to the board, and it gives us an unusual opportunity to be able to interact and ask questions. So if that's good with you, I assume that's why you brought Mr. Trumbauer with you.
Got all the answers. Yeah.
I make a pretty
and all the money too.
I do make a lousy bodyguard though. So.
Miss, I'm sorry, do you have any questions for the team? Yeah.
I was really hoping you were going to call me first. I guess, can you come back around?
I sure can. Dr. Tobin.
Good evening, County Executive, Mr. Trumbauer. Thank you for being here. So, you heard the testimony that we've been hearing, and we've all been getting emails circling around essentially a lot of the same questions. So I would ask you, I mean, we know that obviously we're not functioning well in the market right now. As you said, this is a market-driven economy, but that doesn't just go for bus drivers, unfortunately. And so To be blunt, we've been playing whack-a-mole in our budget for the last few years. You know, there's a crisis point, and we've, in some cases, robbed Peter to pay Paul to increase. And there is concern, I think, not about the bus drivers receiving additional money. I think most people understand why that should be and what's important about it, but that we have other groups who have, who are going to be looking at that and asking why they're not on that list. And as you said, we're a team and we deal ultimately with the same funding source. And so what are your thoughts around that? I mean, it's not a certainty, but it's a guess on my part that this is a question that's going to come up. So.
Well, it's true. If we do this, it makes it harder for us to do this for others. There's a limited amount of money. And so that's what makes it a hard decision. And but we are doing this, in my view, because we have to get kids to school and home. And that's just a necessity. I don't believe we're rewarding bad behavior. Yes, there was one company that struck for 2 days, but I think we would have been in this place regardless of whether they had, because we have all these vacancies and routes that are not operating. So this did not start with the strike, and that's not what brought us here.
Thank you.
Ms. Shaham?
Good evening. Thank you for being here. So I thought I heard you say that you're not sure if we can do all 3 items. But when I hear what's been said certainly over the last week, and what we know that we need, how are you gonna be all in and then not be all in, if that makes sense? And as a sidebar to that, we have American Rescue Plan money, right? So can you maybe illuminate us as to how much you have at your disposal on that, and why we couldn't tap that for this explicit purpose?
Well, we have other things that we want to spend that on as well. As do you. You have 120 million. I think we have 112 million to continue operations. I guess the question is, what's the right number? And I don't know. If we do a $5 an hour increase, which is a pretty significant increase, is that a retention bonus? Does that serve that purpose? I don't know. It's a worthwhile question to ask. Or do we do more in retention bonus and less in hourly? Or can we do the whole thing? I mean, really, this is a conversation that the whole county council has to have. Our budget analysts have to take a look at it. We have to see if that 7.5 or 7.4 million is the right number. If we're we started with looking at bus drivers and CDL licenses, and now we're talking about aides as well. And I don't know the situation with the ones that work for AACPS versus the contractors, and how wide do we spread the net? Those all impact the total number, but these are all questions that have to, and we would be irresponsible, all of us, not to dig deep into the numbers and try to both, protect the taxpayer and the worker.
Thank you.
Mr. Silkworth?
Thank you, President Ellis. You mentioned that we have $120 million. I'm not sure we do have $120 million. If we're talking about the ESSER funds, those funds have not been, we've applied for the grants, but we have not received those funds. And I just the public needs to know that we're not sitting on $108 or $120 million. Our hope is that we will get that. I guess mine is going to be more of a comment than a question, and it's because I've been around a long time. It's clear in my mind that our bus drivers deserve more, and having said that, I would suggest that over the years, our economy has evolved and changed a great deal. For instance, I'd suggest that the cost of housing, whether owned or rented, is, in my mind, kind of out of control. It costs someone $1,200, $1,500, $2,000, and wages have not kept up with that. So, and many of our employees are working, you talked about $25,000. And I happen to be one, and I know everyone in this room, we all value all of our employees, every single one of them, for their dedication. And most of our employees, in spite of their financial woes, they stay with us and they continue to help our children. I'm not placing blame anywhere. I'm just simply stating the facts as I've seen them over time. And I'm not sure that maintenance efforts, there have been times when maintenance efforts, it's not going to get us to where we need to go. The number of students that we are now teaching has increased dramatically. Not only that, but the social issues that our students have that impact their lives, their education, their families, has changed so much over the course of my career. So, as I said, this board member will continue to advocate for all of our kids, will advocate for equity for all of our kids. At the same time, I would like to thank you and Mr. Trumbauer and all of our county council for you. Over the past few years, you have shown that you're willing to make some tough decisions to make sure that we do get monies. But I'm here to tell you, we have a long way to go. And the only way our kids are going to benefit is if we continue to build relationships with one another, collaborate with one another, so that we can help fix this together. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you've said. I mean, we are, like I said earlier, one team with one source of money, and it's just absolutely essential that that we address the kids in the school and their families. I mean, I think you probably heard me talk about the kindergarten readiness issue when we were talking about the Opportunity Gap Commission launching. And, you know, we're at 47%, and it's a much higher, I think it's 55% for white kids and down in the 30s for Black and Hispanic kids. And that has to do with families and how they are doing before their kids come to school, and trauma and all those things, particularly, as you said, affordable housing. And so when we look at our ARPA funds, we're considering a lot of proposals for housing. It's a major, major issue. Even $100 million is a drop in the bucket in the housing market, but we have hard work to do there to improve the lives of the families and the kids so that when they come to school, they're ready. I mean, there's no question in my mind that all of us share the same values, whether it's, you know, and that we're one team, so.
Ms. Frank?
Thank you. County Executive Pittman, you stated in your email to the board on October 6th that the message you hoped to bring in person yesterday was that Anne Arundel County, your primary funder, stands ready to assist you in stepping up and paying the livable wage that would allow these companies to meet the terms of their contract. I asked in advance of this meeting if any county executive had ever interfered in the board's negotiation process, and in recent memory that was a no. While I know that the ARPA funds are at your discretion, the $7.4 million as a recurring budget request would have to be approved by the county council. And in your letter, you seemed very confident in your comments that this would be approved. But in your comments today, you are saying that the county council would have to have these discussions. So do you represent the county council in this matter? And does the county council know where they would find these funds?
Can you read me the part of the letter where I said I was confident the council would approve this?
You said that the Anne Arundel County, your primary funder, stands ready to assist you in stepping up and paying the livable wage that will allow these companies to meet the terms of their contracts.
Right. So doing that may or may not mean approving 100% of the supplemental request. And doing that may not happen in 1 year. So I'm speaking for myself when I say that we stand ready to step up. Nobody else is going to step up because the budget for this, we do $69 million in transportation now from the county, and we're talking about raising it another 7+. And so it is I and the county council, but I was speaking for myself there when I said that we stand ready.
Do I get a follow-up or?
I meant the Anne Arundel County administration.
So how else would you be able to assist in this matter?
With the funding that the contractors have said that they need to be able to fulfill the terms of their contracts. Money. And so in terms of interference with all of this, it's what the budget process requires, is that we have these conversations about where the money goes and how much money is needed.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Corkadell?
Thank you, President Ellis. Thank you, County Executive Pittman and Mr. Trumbauer. So I guess I'm coming in admittedly a little gun shy, so to speak, as it relates to some of the funding commitments. So I'm not reiterating what Ms. Frank said. I just, when we negotiated with some of our contracts with some of our employee units, in most recent, as the last budget approval, there was a commitment on our end and an agreement and conversations of support. Yet when the budget was adopted, we had to do what got us in this position in the first place. We had to reassign money that one priority was counting on in order to fulfill that contractual obligation. And it was built on that collaboration. So I guess my question is, in this particular instance and moving forward, is there anything that should be getting done different in order to build that trust that significantly eroded come July 1 in the budget, ownership, when we were shy the mid-step or the midterm raises for some of our employee units that we had requested and already had negotiated from the previous year. So we are now obliged. Likewise, when we renegotiate these contracts, even in amidst the council approval, there's going to be an ownership for recurrence. And so I'm wondering if we could just maybe discuss about what we could be doing differently together to get us to a place of a little bit more confidence and assurance. And I'm saying that because that's what I'm hearing, is concern of the follow through after the first round. Could you speak a little bit about that, as to how we can build that better and not fall into that predicament of the $850,000, I believe, or something to that
So if you're
effect?
talking about the
Yeah.
half step that y'all negotiated last year that then we funded this year, is that what you're?
Well, in impasse, it's not necessarily a back and forth as much as a requirement, as you know, but I just, point being that once we enter into the agreement, we're in an agreement. And I think that is where
Once we approve a budget, you know how much money there is. So it'll never change that the county council approves a budget and there's a process that you can never predict.
Well, correct. I'm just
And
saying.
the county never funds the
Yeah.
full request. I don't know that that's ever happened in the past.
I'm referring more to the relationship. And I just say that because I know we've been working with you guys left and right every single day, all hands on deck, and some incredible people on both sides who are not in this room right now that probably deserve more credit than either you or I do in making some of these things materialize in such a good, positive way, not just with this, but with others. However, the council has not been part of the table. And I got to say, I'm planning on moving forward with this. But I'm wondering what we should be doing different in regards to, or could be doing different in regards to working with you and also working with our council to get a better foundation in some of these challenges that we encounter from time to time.
I'm going to let Chris talk about the conversations that happen at budget time between our team and your team, because I think that it's very constructive. In terms of the board talking to the county council, to try to get the county council to contribute more toward the budget, I think that's good old-fashioned lobbying, and you're all free to do it, and I think you do. But they have priorities that they have to balance. So that's the way our democracy works. But if you want to talk to the process staff-wise.
Well, sure, and thank you, Ms. Corkadell, Chris Trumbauer, Budget Officer. Leading up to the introduction of the proposed budget, of course, we speak to Mr. Shaknovich and Mr. Sansky. The whole budget team does, and we've had, I would characterize it as an extraordinarily collaborative relationship. And as the county exec said, and I think the board knows, you guys propose what you think is needed for the best possible school system. It's our job to balance what resources we have and mix and match and prioritize, and we do that on a day-to-day basis, using Mr. Shaknovich and his team as point people. Our presumption is that they're in touch with the superintendent and the board, much as I'm in touch with the county exec and members of the council. And that process over the last 3 years, again, I think has been extraordinary. And I say that as someone who was a legislator on the county council for 8 years and saw it when the relationship maybe wasn't as good as it is now. So I'm very appreciative of that, having seen both sides of it. I'm not entirely sure what you are referencing in the comments about what happened after July 1st, so I may be a little slow on the uptake on a Monday evening.
I guess in this situation, I've heard you guys have, you guys publicly made public your multitude of conversations with the contractors, with the bus drivers of their employees, and with the school, but there's an absence of the council, and if they're the ultimate decision makers, I'm just wondering, have they been engaged on your end? I know what we do on our end. I'm just asking, is there been engagement in these moments where when we get in front of them that there's going to be an that you guys are sharing adequate enough information? Because I know that's challenging between the legislative and executive branch. And that's why I'm asking, because I think for our public and our families, they're not seeing that engagement, and so I'm just trying to provide that opportunity for you guys to maybe elaborate. So
Yeah, I mean, this has moved awfully fast. I have had some conversations with some council members. They won't like getting a $7+ million budget request, supplemental budget request. We don't like it. Nobody likes it. I also know that they want to get kids to school and they want these companies to fulfill their contracts. So we certainly will be talking to them. And there'll be tough conversations, but I think the relationships are good there as well. And I the public will probably be talking to them as well. They'll be listening to their constituents.
thank you. I think that was important to say out loud.
I'm going to take just a moment, I'm sorry, to make us all a little uncomfortable in this room. But look, I was going to come back. I appreciate what you said. We all want to get these kids to school. There's absolutely no doubt. We all have the same goal in mind. And I'm very frustrated with where we're sitting right now. I'm going to be honest with you. I really wish all the creative solutions that we've been working on over the last several weeks, that work had begun sooner. I really do. I think we would have been in a better place than we are right now. But County Executive Pittman, you mentioned that we've been in this place. We would have been in this place even without the strike. Except that's when you reacted. That's when you jumped on social media, pinning this on AECPS, this nationwide problem, and demanding a plan. This is a business decision. This requires business solutions. You stated moments ago, your team will now take this plan and analyze it and along with the county council, determine what makes sense. And my understanding is that's what we were doing together, or at least AECPS and your team were doing. And now we have numbers out there because a plan was called for. And so now there's expectations out there that are tied to specific numbers. I just can't help but wonder if a better outcome would have been maybe a joint statement between you and Dr. Arlotto and this board. Just sending the message out there, look, I know you're waiting for a plan and solutions, and I promise you we are working together on this, and as soon as we have it worked out, again, this nationwide problem, this is not unique to AACPS, just giving that message out there together jointly, I just feel would not have put us in a place where now we have again, we got some hard numbers out there. And everyone's watching now to see what this board's going to do with it, see what you're going to do with it, see what the county council's going to do with it. And that includes our food service workers and maintenance staff and everyone else throughout the system. So I'm sorry, I know I'm making a statement here, but I guess my question for you is how can we work together a little more collaboratively? I'm prepared.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's transparency is difficult, democracy is difficult. My view is that it's a positive thing that we have some numbers out there and that we have a proposal on the table. And so now we're hearing from the contractors about that. We'll hear from drivers, I'm sure. We'll hear from parents. We'll hear from others, as well as we'll hear from other folks who want to raise. And it's uncomfortable, but I think it's where we have to be. And I think we have no choice but to work together, and we will work together. The public is watching. They don't care whose money it is or which side gets credit or any of that. They want this done. And so we're all under pressure to act, and I think that's the best medicine we can have, and we're going to do it. No question about that.
Ms. Omasori?
As in work together.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I have to be quite frank. After everyone's gone around, they've taken everything I could say. I think I'm pretty much going to echo what everyone has said, but primarily President Ellis. As you said, the public is watching, and I've heard a lot of parents who have the right to be upset, whether that's the contractors, whether that's the board, whether that's the county. They have the right to be upset that their child can't get to school. And since the public is watching, at least from my perspective, I feel like it puts us at a very, very large and significant disadvantage if our relationship, board and county, is seen as adversarial, which is why I was disappointed in some of the things I saw from your office in relation to what we're trying to do to solve this problem. That, to be quite frank with you, I'll speak as the student on the board. It affects me. It affects me when buses get canceled, when students have to rush out because their bus is going to take 2 extra routes, what have you. And so all I can say, I guess I don't particularly have a question, but all I can say is that I hope in the future this collaborative, camaraderie that we are showcasing right now is given in the space of the benefit of the doubt. That we don't go straight to, I don't want to use the word blaming, but go straight to, painting one side as negative and focusing on the we're teammates, not combatants when it comes to this. But I think President Ellis pretty much summed it up perfectly. I'm glad that she was able to speak before I did, because she pretty much hit the nail on the head. But that's all I can say for this. And I'm glad that we are reaching, at least I'll say we're reaching towards a resolution that gets my peers, students back in school, which is all that we want. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. No.
Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate something I think the county executive was trying to get across. And first, let me just say, I believe, and he can kick me under the table if I'm wrong, I mean, he's here in support of your action today. So when he says we need to check the numbers, what we're talking about is the process. The process that's set up is you all will take your action today. That will get then given over to the county. We will then need to introduce a bill to the county council. At that point, just like any legislation, the budget office will analyze it, the county auditor's office will analyze it, just like anything else. So we're not attaching a specific new scrutiny to this proposal. What we're saying is we're glad that you took action. The next step would be we will get the request to introduce legislation. That will go through our normal county process. And then, as the county executive said, constituents will weigh in, others will weigh in, and numbers will be vetted just like anything else. So I just wanted to echo what I'm hearing from several of you, which is we're on the same team. I know the county executive thinks that too. So I wanted to make sure we ended on that note that he's here today as I think a positive reinforcer of the board's action. And I didn't get kicked, so I think we're
Well
good.
said. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Alato, I think the board is ready to move on with your proposal and any questions that they might have for you or Mr. Cheknovich and County Executive and Mr. Trumbauer. You're welcome to stay with us and be part of the conversation if you like. But we'll move on to your.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Cheknovich is going to come up, and you have a document in front of you that shows each of the state categories and what the requested supplemental change would be of the county government.
Good evening. For the record, Alan Cheknovich, Chief Operating Officer. It is in reference to item 4.01 that's an action item regarding a second quarter operating budget supplemental request for fiscal year 2022. The operating budget request, as you see in the exhibit before you, would ask for a mid-year supplemental operating budget allocation towards the Board of Education. It would be a figure that would be inside of the confines of maintenance of effort because it would be conventional operating monies on a recurring basis. And the two state categories that would be affected are the transportation state category, and we'll go deeper into this in terms of both funding for contracted employees as well as in-house employees. And then there's a very small fixed charges element, and the fixed charges element is strictly associated with AACPS employed individuals. So we'll sort of take a step back and sort of walk our way into that. So let's begin first by talking about the numbers that aren't up there on the board. We have had, and some of you alluded to it, and I know the administration alluded to, we've had a number of extremely productive conversations with members of the county, with our contracting community, other subject matter experts in this. The county's Workforce Development Corporation and Economic Development Corporations have been beyond outstanding in terms of communication, collaboration, doing some of the heavy lifting that's not just reflected in dollars and cents, but in many of the other things that would be required to solve this. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge their work, but beyond that, talk about some of those things that are things like having job fairs and helping to bring in the military affiliated communities, working with or building a bridge with our community college to have them accelerate the ability of having CDL qualified individuals obtain learners permits, et cetera. So we've covered some of this material at the last two board meetings. So to some extent I'm repeating myself, but I want you to understand that there's a foundational basis for this. It's not sort of a unilateral proposal in that regard. So with respect to the recruitment and retention bonuses, I want to tackle those one at a time, although they are interrelated. So Recruitment or retention bonuses, bonuses by their very nature are essentially one time in nature, right? That's what we're talking about here. And I know that through our own observations and some of the preliminary work that the Workforce Development Corporation has already done, there's a range out in the market space. I know that they are sort of polishing the end of their homework to determine what that is, but a $2,000 figure seemed supportable, at least preliminarily figured supportable based on observations out in the market space. And the market space is not just in the public sector, but very much in the private sector as well. And this really is a private sector dominated conversation we're having here. So recruitment and retention bonuses are not one and the same. So a recruitment bonus is associated with essentially getting somebody in the door the first time. So they are currently not an employee, not a bus driver or a bus attendant, a bus driver in this case for a company. It's getting them in the door, incentivizing them to make application, go through the process of becoming certificated to drive a bus, and then being able to be fielded and put out into service in terms of driving the students. So in a recruitment type scenario, that typically, the disbursement of those funds is a little bit front loaded. So I'm really just making up a hypothetical example because none of this is in stone. But if you took a $2,000 number, right, in a recruitment kind of scenario, you would want that to be a little bit more front loaded. So more of those funds would get distributed early on, i.e. upon signing or upon reaching some qualifications goal. And then the balance of the funds would be paid out over likely 2 other installments. One sort of mid-span when somebody has attained some other milestones, longevity milestones, et cetera, and then likely one at the end of the academic calendar year to make sure that they stayed all the way through and fulfilled their obligations through essentially the midpoint of June. Retention bonus is a little bit of the opposite, right? They're already employed in some capacity driving a bus in this scenario. So it's not as important to have it front loaded because you're not attracting somebody in the door, you're incentivizing them to stay. And so while it is important to have some modicum of those funds distributed early, and then also some of it mid-span, right, mid-year, mid-performance period. But in all likelihood, that would be more heavier backloaded because while they're already here, you want to incentivize them to finish out their entire contract period and perform fully to the end. The natural question would be, well, why, although the distribution schedule may look different, why would the number not be different? And I'm just going to give you the thinking on that, right? So if you only did a recruitment bonus, you could create a sort of an adverse or a negative situation in which you'd have drivers that would be jumping from contractor A to B or B to C simply to get a bonus, a sign-on sort of a recruitment bonus. But it really doesn't help build or stabilize the industry. It just moves the problem from contractor A to contractor B, but in reality, problem still remains. There's still a bus that doesn't have a driver. And so, the dynamic is you don't really want to set up a competition between attracting new drivers or retaining existing drivers because both are equally important. And because they're equally important, they need to be equally valued. And again, the timing or the calendaring of that may look a little bit different, but that's the rationale in that regard. Because they are kind of one-time funds, right? There's no obligation or promise that they're to continue on in perpetuity. Those are the kind of funds that are one-time funds that are ready or able to be paid by, for example, a grant or some sort of unique funding structure that does not have to be recurring in nature. So with that, I'll kind of briefly set aside the recruitment and retention side of the equation and sort of migrate our way over to the operating element. I'm sorry, and with respect to the recruitment and retention, that is not subject to in essence, not subject to a vote by this board. Okay, it is part of the plan that is being pondered and put forward, but that does not, in effect, take an action of this board. That is actually a decision that can be made on the part of the administration and economic development, workforce development corporation, more specifically, in all likelihood here. So that is not what's before you this evening, but I wanted to make sure that you had the complete picture. What's before you this evening is a request for a supplemental operating budget allocation. That it will be a mid-year adjustment to your already adopted FY22 budget. You're talking about a compensation, and there's some fixed charges, but we'll set that aside temporarily. You're talking about a compensation enhancement to employees that is contemplated to essentially have permanency, right? Because we're not contemplating providing them an X dollar per hour compensation enhancement, and then that's going to disappear in X months or Y months or even next fiscal year. So it needs to have some permanency, right? It needs to be recurring with the thought that it would continue and essentially create a new baseline, or in effect create a new point from which future negotiations, future bids, et cetera, would continue to occur. And so traditionally, things that are reoccurring in that nature typically are funded with PAYGO, right? It's an ongoing operating budget type of scenario. Not that grant funding can't be used as a bridging strategy, but eventually it's something that, you know, most budgeteers would look to make permanent, right? To permatize the structure. We have a combination here in our county of partially contracted, mostly contracted, over 90%. Contracted, and we self-perform a little bit of that in-house. We have 585 routes that are outsourced, that are contract right now. So 585 contracted routes that require a driver. Our contract with the companies basically requires that they have a 10% spare capacity. A bench. We've talked about a bench in this forum, but it is not contemplated that the entire 10% of their spare capacity, their bench, really be frontline substitute drivers. So 5% is probably the natural break point there in terms of having subs, because beyond that, they have the ability to do what they already are doing. They can employ supervisory personnel on the front line. They can put mechanics on the front line. There are other personnel within a bus company that could be pressed into service. So really we're talking in terms of the contracted workforce, those 585 principal routes, which take 585 drivers, and then a 5% spare capacity. And a 5% spare capacity is 29 if you run the math out. Same thing with aides. On the contracted side, we have 258 attendants, aides, that are assigned specifically dedicated towards routes, and then that same 5% spare capacity logic they elaborated on earlier is also in essence applicable. So if you have 258 aides, you need about 13 additional spares amongst the contractors to cover times when somebody is on leave, you know, calls out for whatever reason, or there's a transition window between somebody departing and somebody coming back. I think we talked earlier that the drivers do not, in fact, you know, work a full hour day, 8-hour day. They work. The drivers typically work a 6.75 hour day, and the attendants or aides work about a 6.5 hour day, and that's an average. Right, some work more, some work a little bit less, but that's kind of an average. Our contractors basically have about a 182-day service window. There's a 180-day academic year, and then there are pre-service days. They have to dry run routes, they have to do training, things like that. So that's about 182 days. If you were to apply a $5 an hour gross, this is gross, compensation enhancement times those driver and attendant figures that I shared earlier, that's about just under $5.4 million, $5.375 million for that. We in Anne Arundel County also have our own AACPS employed drivers and aides. We have 58 drivers and 46 aides. They already work 8 hours a day. So essentially, it would be through negotiations. The concept would be to provide that same level of the playing field in a way, $5 an hour compensation increase. Again, that's a gross number that can be distributed differently depending on negotiations, et cetera. But with those 58 AACPS drivers and with the 46 AACPS aides at that $5 an hour compensation increase, together, that's about an $852,000 fiscal note on that. Okay. The last piece is then what would it take to have those drivers and aides work longer than essentially they currently do. That's roughly 6.75 hour driver window and a 6.5 hour aid window or attendant window. And again, this would be on a contracted side only because AACPS employed drivers and aides already work an 8-hour schedule, so that would not really affect the math on that. Running the differentials through would be approximately about another $1.25 million to do that. Pull those numbers together, the $5 an hour compensation increase for in-house and contracted personnel and the extension of their duty day is how you arrive at that 7.455 operating budget figure. Backing up the train just a little bit, I did want to elaborate a little bit more about the bonus issue and just explain some of the net, the gross numbers on that. We currently, and I think we've had those conversations here, we currently are about 60 drivers short. That's kind of like the headline figure, right? And again, we talked about sort of on or about a $2,000 kind of number being the right number potentially for a recruitment scenario. We also know that there is going to be some attrition going on. So instead of calculating it at 60, which is kind of the number we're looking at, this model is built for 70. So 70 is the N, right? So 70 recruitment bonuses at $2,000 each is $140,000. And then on the retention side of the equation, with the 614 drivers, which is the primaries plus spares, and the 271 attendants, which is the primaries plus spares, at $2,000 each, the drivers would be about $1.2 million, and the attendants would be about $542,000. So those numbers all added together, the 140, the 1.25, and the 542 gets you to $1.91 million. So $1.91 million, again, that's not subject to your vote, but just so you understand the numbers would be embedded within the recruitment and retention arena, and then the 7.4546 number before you would be embedded within a supplemental request in terms of operating dollars. I think that hits most of the pertinent data points, and I guess with that, Madam President and Mr. Superintendent, we would turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shiknovich. Dr. Arlotto, should I move on to questions? Do you have anything else to add? Okay. Ms. Schallheim.
Yes, I think this question is probably for Dr. Arlotto. Going back to what we heard in testimony about how this pot of money could be structured, it seems to me that it's either, an hourly, a per hour increase, or it could be structured in other ways. So is this like any other bucket of money that we receive in your recommended budgets every year, where it's a placeholder subject to negotiation with the contractors? Or are we hard on the $5 an hour model as opposed to a percentage increase like what we heard in testimony?
That's all subject to negotiations. And not yet negotiations, let me clarify, not yet negotiations with the contractors. Negotiations with the county government. We have to sit down and have conversations, as the county executive said appropriately. This is a starting point. I don't know that it's going to be $5 an hour. I don't know that it's going to be $2,000 for a signing bonus or retention bonus. But that's the plan that we move forward, we think is appropriate. We hope to see it get funded. Don't know that it will, but it has to get through the channels that the county government has in place that Mr. Trumbauer described. Whatever comes out on the back end of that is what we will then take to the contractors to make adjustments to their contracts.
And then that could be arranged, assuming it gets through all those steps, as either a dollar or several dollar per hour increase or a percentage increase. That'll be decided after we get through all of this, correct?
Correct.
All right, great. Thank you.
Dr. Tobin?
Thank you. So I want to make sure I understand what we are likely to request. We're talking about a budget supplement, and now I'm talking about the 7.455616 number. A recurring supplement, correct? Which my understanding then is what we're asking is for this money in perpetuity, and whatever the guarantee is, that money will be there for this purpose. In other words, when we go back next year to ask the following year for our money, what happens? I mean, do we then face the prospect of having to argue all over again for whether or not we can get this money for the bus drivers? Given that if this goes through the process as outlined, the county council will presumably have agreed to the fact that we need this money to have an appropriate bus driver fleet, but it could all be taken away, or we could be told the next year, well, you're going to have to decide now whether to give that money to bus drivers or somebody else. How do I understand this? I want to know what we're getting into here. So
let me start with the intent piece, and then maybe send it over to the administration. But I think we're going to be pretty close in our answer. What Mr. Trumbauer told you is factually correct. I think we almost become, Siamese twins during budget season. So the intention, Dr. Tobin, I'm sorry, is that this would be a permanent compensation enhancement, not to be withdrawn or neutered at some point in time into the future. For that to be the case, the monies would have to be reoccurring and made permanent within the budget. The funding source in its totality, being within maintenance of effort, would be there. The risk, if there is a risk, and this is where I'm going to pass it off though, is in any year, ultimately you're subject to the budget ordinance, right? And our budgets are dispensed within those state categories. You, the board, and with the superintendent's advice, have to live within those categories, but in terms of transferring money, between categories, et cetera, that requires the concurrence of partners in county government. But each and every year, all of that is re-examined. So before I turn it over to my friends to my right, I don't think any of us could say this is a certainty never to be relitigated, never to be re-examined, et cetera, because annual budgets, by definition, are annually reappropriated and then reauthorized, but they don't have to be carbon copies of each other. And maybe I'll turn it over to my friends here.
Chris can talk to you about the difference between recurring and 1 year, but it's the things that we expect. I mean, a recession comes along, there's less revenue for whatever reason. When we have to make cuts, even in recurring expenses, then that's painful. But it's the things that we expect to recur. You have 12-year contracts with these companies, so you know that this is going to recur. Yeah.
And I'll just add, Dr. Tobin, the end result of this process, if you all pass your action and then the county council passes the appropriation bill, there's only two things that will happen. Transportation will be increased by $7.634 million, and fixed charges would be increased by $91,201. That's the only action the county takes. We put more money into those two buckets. What happens after that is entirely on the board's purview. So the negotiations, how it's structured, all we do is the money. And you, like we discussed before, you all will submit this request. It'll go through our process. We can't guarantee here at the table tonight that it will emerge exactly as you request, but something will happen. I'm fairly confident. And then again, if it's different from what you all requested, you will get the end product, and then you will decide what changes to make or how to negotiate that or what have you. Next year, as Mr. Shaknovich said, every new budget, in some sense, is a blank slate. So the board will have its request. The administration will put our proposed budget together. The county council has ultimate fiscal authority on that. But if you take out the pandemic year of the previous fiscal year and you look at FY20 and FY22, I mean, this administration has funded well above maintenance of effort. So that's not the constraint. The constraint is what resources we have to dedicate to the board, and then working collaboratively with you all where we prioritize those. So I can say with relative confidence, we would not put this in 1 year and then completely unfund it the next year. That's just bad budgeting. But as I hope you all would agree, we're always interested in looking at the budget to see where there might be savings or changes or something year over year. And that's what I think Mr. Shaknovich and myself excel at, is all that behind the scenes work to get to the final product that gets there. So I hope that helped answer your question, which I thought was a good one.
It does, thank you. And just to say, though, as has been noted, we're now in a very public position of making very public promises, essentially. And I think I take that very seriously. I think we all do. And it's well known, I think, to anybody who's been following this. We didn't get here overnight. This has been a decades-long journey. And we're probably not going to get out of it overnight by any means. But we do face a situation where if we move forward with this and we make that promise, we've committed a portion of our budget one way or another that we will not be able to maneuver as easily in other years, because we've made a promise that I believe, and I think we all believe, we should keep. And so I'm just trying to sort of keep track of that in the process of discussion. So thank you.
Ms. Corkadell?
This one's just for Alex. Just a quick clarification, and I mean, I have a pretty good understanding of the budget process and even some of the law code stuff, but just very isolated. When we'll be submitting this as a proposal technically to the county executive will be submitting it in for introduction, correct? And from what the board obligation is, if this number goes up or down, does it have to come back over to us, or is that going to be just sort of live adjusted while it's in front of the council? Because then at that point, we wouldn't have any further say to make a determination like we are making now, if that makes sense. So in other words, if Mr. Burge's team comes back with a number that requires an additional $100,000 to there, let's say, as in order to make it play, and that's the objective. Or comes back and says, actually, that's a little overshot, and I think, or in the course of restructuring between the incentivization and retention promotions, that the recommendation comes down and you all are in concurrence. Will this then come back to the board? In other words, am I doing this and 4 days from now I may need to come back and redo it, or?
I wish it was that fast.
Yeah, I mean, no, but I'm just saying, like,
Sure.
I'm using just cited examples.
I think I understand your,
Yeah.
I think I understand your question. So let me parse out the answer. To begin with respect to recruitment or retention bonuses, you are taking no action.
Correct.
There is no recorded vote.
Correct.
And so whether there was an adjustment specific to recruitment and retention bonuses, there's no action that you would need to take directly in either the
I
up
think
or
I may have
down.
misspoke, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so I wanted to answer that so we can set that aside. Now, on the operating budget side of the equation, in the general premise is that a unit of county government essentially cannot fund you at a level greater than what you asked for. So this is a little bit of a ceiling in terms of your ask.
Okay. Yeah.
So if, for whatever reason, new information came to light and said that it should have been a number higher than this, that would require this board to take that action to, hypothetically, to increase your ask, and that would then facilitate the administration, ultimately the legislative body, the county council, the final fiscal authority, to consider that higher number. Conversely, if it comes in lower, you likely would not need to take any action immediately, as Mr. Pittman and Mr. Trumbauer said. It is subject, just like your regular budget, right? It's going to be subject to a lot of sort of, I'll say, scrutiny in the correct way, because budgeteers and auditors apply scrutiny, right? So they're going to apply scrutiny in the right way, and ultimately they will approve a figure within a state category that's lower than what you asked for, right? So that then will come back to you, and at that time you actually will, if it's not an exact match, you will then actually have to take a vote to adopt that revised budget that differs than what your ask is, if that helps you any.
It does. Just as a quick follow-up, if I may, President Ellis, then since some of my I thought our transit, that we typically are drawing on that off of our per pupil allocation from the state, some of those funds for transportation are covered under that, not the FTEs per se, but the other. Is there an interest in us trying to identify and see if there are opportunities at the state level for funding, recognizing it's a statewide program? Like, is that something that's in the works going on that we should be paying attention to as we unfold this?
So I'll say in general, no.
Okay.
At the top level, no, because the state funding formulas are extremely formulaic. They're very rigid and kind of prescriptive, formulaic. So essentially, it's a math equation, and that they apply essentially across the state. Now, I will say that whether it's what you may have seen or heard from the governor, being interested in this. I know the county executive had some conversations, but even beyond that, you've seen this in the news and you've seen the executive branch of state government. So, might that influence them to maybe put forward a slightly different budget recommendation in January when the governor, for example, produces, his budget, or maybe some legislative changes to the formula between January and April? But that's not really something that you've got much control over. But certainly within your circle of influences, talking to the decision makers at the state level is never harmful. I always encourage you to do that. That advocacy is part of your role. It's part of what you were elected to do, as the county executive pointed out earlier. But no, I would not, it's not the same type of action on the part of the state because it is sort of very rigid and formulaic. So the action you take is
yeah.
applicable to the county, basically.
Thank you for that comprehensive comment. I'll just, for the benefit of my colleagues, it's my understanding that there is talk about during the special session of specifically on the formula. And that's why I was asking, like, is this something we need to be considering separate from tonight, up on the radar for consideration?
Again, we're monitoring it, and I think should the opportunity
as well.
Yes, I mean, we're monitoring to the extent that the opportunity would arise. We would certainly weigh in, right? We would work with you, Ms. Ortiz. You would work with me. The superintendent would work with Zam, et cetera. But, you know, until that opportunity kind of arises, there's not a definitive action for you to take, unlike the operating budget action before you tonight.
So bottom line is the county is going to be our source if funds are what we seek to solve the problem. Okay, thank you.
I will join you in advocating for more state money for this, though.
I see no more lights. Do I have a motion? No motion was given. Wait, yeah, we had the recommendation and no one moved at that time.
I move to support the superintendent's recommendation.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Howell?
Ms. Amasori?
Aye.
Dr. Tobin?
Aye.
Ms. Schallheim?
Aye.
Mr. Silkworth?
Aye.
Ms. Frank?
Aye.
Ms. Corkadell?
Aye.
Ms. Ellis?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. And I think that concludes the agenda item. Thank you again, County Executive Pittman, Mr. Trumbauer, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Arlotto, Mr. Cheknovich.
Motion to adjourn, President Ellis?
Second.
All right, consensus?